Well, as diplomats are arguing over the fine print of any potential nuclear deal, let's hear more on what's at stake for the players. Joining me live now is Annie Machon. She's political analyst and former MI5 agent. Annie, France reportedly scuppered the last talks. Do you expect any sort of surprise this time?
I think it's very positive that they are having these talks and there's a way forward. But I think one of the things that's been forgotten during all this debate about whether they're not trying to develop a nuclear weapons capability is that the US National Intelligence Estimate of 2007, which was the combined thinking of all 16 of their intelligence agencies, said very clearly back then that in their view, Iran had stopped trying to develop a nuclear weapons capability in 2003. And this was written in 2007 and actually stopped the rush to war. In fact, George W. Bush said in his autobiography that it stopped his capacity to go and invade Iran. And to date, this has been pretty much updated. So there is no will, as far as I can see, within Iran to try and develop this capability. So it sounds very much like a lot of diplomatic hot air, and yet, for various other background political reasons.
Sure, and despite what you say, there has been a threat of war, and indeed, of course, those sanctions continue, and indeed, even more sanctions could be pressured onto the country. Has that really made Iran more perhaps concessional about, and perhaps more serious about these negotiations? Have those threats in effect worked?
I don't think so. I mean, the sanctions have been in place for a few years already. I think what we're seeing is a sort of loosening of approach to the diplomatic international world so that they want to reintegrate. And that's fair enough. Why shouldn't they? I mean, compare the treatment that Israel's had over the last 2 decades after they developed their own illegal nuclear weapons capability. They haven't been put under all these sort of sanctions. And I have to say, if I were Iran and I had been put on the list by George W. Bush 10 years ago as one of the 5 countries of the axis of evil, and then look at what happened to the other countries, which include Libya, Iraq and Syria, why on earth wouldn't I want some sort of deterrent, potentially? Although they've made very clear that they don't want to have that deterrent. They just want to have a source of energy.
But without a doubt, Iran has gone against Western interests in the Middle East time and time again. Can the West really afford to lift sanctions and potentially allow it free rein?
Well, I think the irony, of course, is that the USA and the UK, since the 1950s, when they overthrew the democratically elected President Mossadegh in 1953, have been desperate to keep other countries from having an interest and having clout within Iran, particularly Russia and China, because they didn't want them to get their hands on their natural energy reserves. Ironically, the strategy that the US particularly has used in the Middle East over the last decade has meant that it has allowed other countries to have more leverage in that region. So they've shot themselves in the foot, really.
So you're saying Iran can actually be trusted?
I think any country that is willing to engage in the international diplomatic process should be given a hearing. Why should they be any more distrusted than any other country, particularly looking at the track record over the last decade of the US across the Middle East and Central Asia? Why should they be treated differently?
Of course, this is just a 6-month deal under negotiation at the moment. How long do you think it'll take to get an actual permanent solution?
One would hope as quickly as possible, because, of course, there are 80 million people in that country, and they have been living under sanctions already for years. And the Iranian government is now engaging in the international process. There is absolutely no reason why they should be deemed to be a pariah state. So I think in the interest of international justice, a deal should be hammered out, and it would be the best for the country, it would be best for peace in the Middle East, possible peace in the Middle East. So I hope that they do get a deal over the next few days, which will last for years.
So you're actually saying that this agreement is not just about the nuclear issue, it also has a major impact on the Middle East as well, no matter which way this deal actually goes?
Of course it does, yes. I mean, Iran is sitting on top of a huge range of natural resources, oil and gas and things like that. And of course, we should not forget that they did talk about, I think getting on for a decade ago, about beginning to trade some of those resources in euros or rubles. And that's when the US and their vassal states began to get very heavy diplomatically against Iran and threaten war. So this sort of whole issue around the nuclear weapons program, real or unreal, seems to be a sort of smokescreen to try and corral Iran into continuing to trade its oil and its natural gas in the petrodollar and to sort of shore up the American economy that way.
Annie, great to talk to you. Thanks for your perspective. Annie Machon, political analyst and former MI5 agent, live here on RT. Thank you. Well, of course.